The Self-Publishing Advice Conference, SelfPubCon 2025, brings indie authors from around the world together for 2 days of insight, inspiration, and connection. It's live online October 18 and 19 and free to attend. Get early access to our international competition and all the latest conference updates at selfpublishingadvice.org/conference-2025. I'm Howard Lovey of the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com, and you're listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. Every episode, I interview an ALLi member to find out what inspires them and how they are an inspiration to other authors. My guest this episode is David Penny, a longtime ALLi member who began publishing fiction in the 1970s, took a long break to build a career in software, and returned to writing with a renewed focus on independent publishing. Since then, he has written dozens of books across genres, built a loyal readership, and helped others find their way on the self-publishing path. I'll let David Penny tell his story.
Hi, I'm David Penny. I'm an indie author, and somebody asked me last weekend how many books I've published, and somebody else worked out that he's written about 48. But my main series is a thing called the Thomas Barrington Historical Mysteries. And there are currently 14 of those out in the wild and about to be a 15th within maybe 6 weeks.
Wow, that's amazing. 48 books. You know, most of us are lucky if we publish one. So,
yeah.
Well, let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up, and was reading and writing always a part of your life?
Oh, yeah. Reading particularly, and writing, I think. I used to read anything and everything. My mother used to say that if I was having breakfast and I hadn't got a book, I'd just read a cornflakes packet. And it was true. I just had to read constantly. Unfortunately, it's not something I do quite as often now. Life gets in the way, and as you get older, you have more responsibilities. But I used to read a book a day. Initially, that was always science fiction, which I'll get onto in a second. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to write. I can remember I must have been about 8 or 9, sitting on the lawn at my parents' house, which was in a mid-Wales it's a town called Welshpool in mid-Wales, which I was born in London, but we ended up there when I was 6 months old. And I was raised there until I was about 30. And I was using my grandfather's Olivetti manual typewriter, and I was writing a story about aliens invading the Earth.
Oh, that's great. Which
I'm glad I've lost. And there's another story about that, but we may not have time. So I always wanted to do both. And I remember in school, and I don't know if they have these in America, they have groups where you say, what do you want to be when you go out to work? And I always said I want to be a writer. And they said, yes, but what are you going to do to earn money? And I said, well, I'll be a writer and I'll earn some money that way. And they said, oh, well, perhaps you could do journalism. So I said, no, I want to be a fiction writer. And I did. And then years later, when I was unemployed for a while, I went to the unemployment office and they said, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to be a writer. And the best day of that life was in 1974, I had a check for £200 for my first publication and I had an agent and a proper publisher. And I went to the employment office and I said, oh, I want to sign off. I don't need to have payments anymore. And they said, oh, what job have you got? I said, I'm a writer. And turned around and walked out.
That's wonderful. That's a great story.
Yeah.
So yeah, you were published at a fairly young age.
I was 25 when my first book was published, 24 when it was accepted by the publisher.
No, that was science fiction. So you took that from childhood and decided you wanted to stay with science fiction. So what was it like being a young author in the 70s with a traditional publisher?
It just kind of passed me by. I just sat and wrote the next book, and the next book, and the next book, and sent it off to my agent. And then eventually he would come back and say, yes, they've accepted this one. And then I sent off a story to Galaxy magazine and had that accepted, and had stories in other magazines in the UK and elsewhere. And so I was slowly building a name for myself. But then my agent told me one day, if you really want to make this a proper career, you're going to have to move down to London. And I just didn't want to move down to London. Mm-hmm. It scared me. It was too busy and there was too much going on. In retrospect, it was a huge mistake. But I still probably wouldn't do it now.
Yeah. Well, these days you could live anywhere and do everything virtually. But I
Exactly.
guess I suppose at the time you needed to be right where the action was, huh?
It was where everything happened. It was where music happened. It was where writing happened. I mean, all the big names in science fiction lived there. There were magazines setting up left, right, and center, and there's probably a big buzz going on. And I was outside of that. I just sort of I was too deep in the hippie ethos of mid Wales, which was quite a different thing. And did it that way. I set up an underground magazine which we published about 24 issues of. And hand printed it and sold that.
That's great. Yeah. Well, what did your underground magazine focus on? Was it science fiction?
No, there was usually a science fiction stories, but basically I requested material from people. It was quite an alternative place. There were artists, there were musicians. Rod Stewart lived about 10 miles away, and members of the Faces lived about 3 miles away from us. And I think Pink Floyd lived near as well. So it was an area where you could come and buy very cheap houses. And these people got away from the fan groups, because Rod Stewart used to go to the local pub at the weekends, and everybody just treated him as a normal guy.
Oh, that's great.
Even though he used to turn up in a Lamborghini.
So you were schmoozing with Rod Stewart and other rock stars. So you weren't exactly missing the London buzz, I suppose.
No, it was different. It was slightly different. The London buzz had come to us, I suppose.
Right. Well, then you stepped away from writing for a long time. Tell me what happened.
Well, I got married, and I got a job to begin with. I was still writing while I was working. The £200 advances and sort of a tiny little bit of royalties didn't really pay the rent. So I got a job and I worked. I met my wife, we got married, and then we had kids, and I got another job and another job. I have a really strange career in that I have absolutely no ambition, but ambition seems to look for me and grab me by the throat and take me to some strange places. So I ended up lecturing in a college, and within 3 months I was head of department. And then about a year after that, I'd written some software for a local authority, and that took off. And I ended up running a software company for 35 years.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And it kind of subsumed my creativity in a way.
Well, you can be creative in coding, I suppose, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You're not supposed to be, but that's how I did.
Right. So then you returned to writing later in life. Was there just an itch you had to scratch?
I think there was. Gradually, as the IT work. Well, I used to 4 days a week. I used to get in car and drive all over the UK, wherever my secretary decided I was going to be staying, and either training people or trying to sell more software. And so in the evenings, quite often I would sit down and I would do a little bit of writing rather than watch the TV. And so I started writing again. And initially, I started writing fantasy, and I still have a fantasy book, which I self-published. I think it was the first one I did. And it sold 6 copies and it has 8 reviews. So after about a year, I unpublished it. It's still one of my favorite books. So I keep saying I will go back to it. And then as I got closer and closer to retiring, I thought, well, I'll go back to writing. So I did. Even while I was working, I was doing writing. And I looked at what I was going to do with the stuff I'd produced. And I said to him, and the world had changed by then. It was about 2010. And Amazon had appeared, and you could now self-publish. I'm sure you remember in those days, it was like the Wild West.
Right.
You know, everybody was trying to get to take advantage of the publishing, self-publishing hemisphere. And it was crazy. And I shouldn't try to get involved in any of that, but it did affect all proper self-published writers. But I tell everybody I was too arrogant to think I wouldn't get a publishing deal. I'm too impatient to wait 3 years to see my work in print.
Right.
So I thought self-publishing's for me. And then I went to the London Book Fair and met Oda Ross. And basically that was it.
Right.
We just got on like a house on fire.
Right.
And I joined ALLi, and things took off from there.
That's great. So yeah, you went into indie publishing for all the right reasons, I suppose.
It was a conscious decision to do it rather than I still meet a lot of people who look down on indie authors. And I go to lots of writing conferences, and quite often you meet people and they say, "What do you I hear you self-publish and you're very successful." And I say, "Yeah, I do okay. I'm not like some of the big names, but I do okay." And I say, "What about you?" And they said, "Oh no, I'm determined I'm going to get an agent and a deal." And they just keep submitting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, some people need that vote of confidence.
Validation.
Validation, right?
Yeah, they do.
Right.
Yeah, they do.
So then you branched off into other genres, including historical mystery. What was the reasoning behind that?
I'm not a historian. I never was. I hated history when I was in school, never studied it. I'm with my daughter who came home one day and she said, "Dad, what's history? Why am I doing history? It's just one thing after another." And I thought, that's exactly right. That's why people do like it. We were sitting at home one evening, me, my wife, 2 kids, and I don't know why I said, "Do you think anybody's ever written a murder mystery set at the end of Moorish Spain?" And they sort of looked at me, and you could see this glint in their eyes to say, "His dad, he's gone off on one again. Look out, look out." And I thought, it's a great idea. It's a really charismatic period of history. So, not being an historian, I knew nothing about it. So my daughter got me a reading ticket for the John Ryland Library in Manchester, which is one of the great repositories of all of this information on Moorish Spain. And I went in and I had a pair of white gloves and something like a rosary bead, but they're made of chalk, which you have to hold the book's pages down with because they don't mark it. And you were not allowed a pen, but you could have a pencil, a HB pencil. And I took reams and reams and reams of notes over about 4 days and came away with the outline of some ideas. And I always knew from the very outset, well, initially I thought it was going to be 10 books and they were going to run from 1482 to 1492. And as all good Americans know, that was when Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Right.
And so in my mind, the final scene in the final book was going to be my character persuading Christopher Columbus to go back into the Alhambra Palace to persuade the king and queen to give him the funds to pay for his voyage across the Atlantic, which was actually a real historical event, except it obviously wasn't my fictional character that told him to go back. In the end, I only did 9 books in the first Moorish Spain series. I ran out of history and battles. So then, did you end it in 1492, or did you go beyond that? Yep, no, 1482 all the way to 1492. Final scenes obviously were the fall of Granada and the Alhambra Palace, and I learned so much about Moorish Spain and the Reconquista and everything else. And my character became not friendly, but familiar with the Spanish king and queen, and so he got closer and closer to them. So when we got to the last book, I thought, what do I do now? And I thought, well, he's friendly with King and Queen. Catherine of Aragon is going to marry Prince Arthur of England, the son of Henry VII. So I thought, I'll bring him back because he knows Catherine of Aragon. She spent more time in his house in Granada than she did in the palace. And he was sent to make sure she was safe on the journey and to look after her when she arrived in England, which is what the first of the Tudor series of books was about. Mm-hmm. And then, if people know history, it ended badly because she married Prince Arthur and 6 months later he died. They both fell seriously ill and Arthur died, so Catherine was sort of cut adrift. So now, at the moment, they're talking about her marrying young Prince Henry, who became Henry VIII. So there's a lot of books still to read, Howard.
Well, how do you balance historical accuracy with good storytelling?
For me, the first thing is the storytelling. The historical accuracy is essential, and you have to get it right. I made a mistake once, and I referred to somebody as somebody's nephew, and he was their brother. And I got about 20 strident emails saying, "Oh, this is useless. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about, you know." And I just looked it up in the wrong source and used the wrong information. So I double check all of that now. But somebody gave me a great review and they said, David Penny is a great historical writer because the history is like a mist rather than a smack in the face.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly what I want it to be. You are aware there are historical events happening.
Right.
And they are referred to, but there's not a lot of detail behind
Right.
it.
It's not an encyclopedia entry about the history.
No,
it's just a story.
No. Yeah, I'm sure everybody's read a lot of historical novels where the history is obviously the writer is really keen on the historical elements of it, but they let the reader know all the way through. And I'm not so keen on that. My favorite historical writer is C.J. Sansom, who's unfortunately died. And he was the same. There's a lot of history in his books, but you are not really aware of it.
Right. Yeah. If it's a backdrop, and if, maybe you'd have to look it up later. I don't know. But
well, if you're interested, yeah. But I think that the story should drag you through.
Yeah.
The story should be enough. Although historical mysteries, historical fiction has an avid readership, and they like the history. They like the fact that it's historical.
Yeah, well, if you had 10 people tell you that this was a brother and not a nephew, they're really paying attention.
It is, yeah, indeed. I now have 3 shelves in my bookcase with nothing but historical books and lots on Moorish Spain, and now I've got lots on the Tudors and the London of that time. I found a great book, which is an illustrations of London as it was in 1400, which is brilliant. Absolutely super.
Oh, that's great. That's great background.
Yeah. And a map of London at the time, which is even better.
So you've also written in other genres, including contemporary crime thrillers and paranormal spy fiction. What draws you to these different types of stories, and how do you?
The police thriller was as I said, when I started thinking about writing it, the police thriller was an idea of mine that I had plotted out maybe 20 years ago even. And it moved around a bit since. It was always going to be initially set in mid-Wales, where I grew up. And then I moved to Gloucestershire, so it was going to be in Gloucestershire. And then I thought, no, it's not sexy enough, so I made it Herefordshire. And then when we moved up above Liverpool, I've set it now in the Forest of Bowland, which is an unknown part of English beauty. It's a really, really lovely area. But the thought remained the same, so it was always going to be that. And then I thought, it's about time I wrote this. So I sat down and wrote that. It doesn't sell very well, but then there's only one in the series, and there's going to be at least 3 books in that. The paranormal spy thriller was, again, about 10 years old, the concept of that. And that was always going to be 5 novels, a series with 5 books. And it was about this guy, Callum Borger, who can see into the future, but only by 10 seconds, which is an absolutely useless paranormal ability, unless you happen to be the bombardier in a Lancaster flying over Germany. And then everybody wanted to fly in his plane because he never missed his targets, and they never got shot down because he could see them being shot and told the pilots to jink and move away. And I really like that book, but again, it doesn't sell because I need to write the other 4 in it. And I know the final scene in the 5th book of that, exactly what it's going to be.
So, you mentioned a couple of times that if something doesn't sell, it's because you need to write more of them. Is that the secret to your success, the sheer bulk? It
is, yeah. You need, it's sort of sheer bulk. Well, it's kind of sheer bulk, but it's sheer bulk over 14 years now. Mm-hmm. You've come across 50 books to 20K, I'm sure, Howard. Mm-hmm. And rapid release. I know people who are releasing a book a week, a book a month rather. And I know some authors in some of the groups I'm in, and they've got 50, 80 books that they do. None of them sell huge amounts, but if you've got 80 books, each one doesn't need to sell that much for you to make a reasonable living out of them. So, yeah, when I talk to people, somebody came up to me last 2 weekends ago and said, I've got this book and I'm thinking about self-publishing it. And I said, is it just the one book? He said, yes, it's a standalone. And I said, could you make it a series? He says, no, I want it to be a standalone. And I said, it's going to be a hard sell. People it may be just me, but I think people really like to have a series. And we all know series sell. You know, you've only got to look at some of the best sellers and their series. Harlan Coben with his series, Robert Crace, Stephen King now with his Mr. Mercedes series, and so on and so on. If you're a really, really, really good writer, you can write standalones, but you've still got to write more than 2 or 3 of them, because readers will not let themselves get into a writer if there's just one book. And that's not strictly true, because, you know, The Gone with the Wind was a single book. Lots of American writers have single books that are huge sellers, and they never write a second one. That's not so much the case anymore. It's very difficult to make many sales from a standalone single book.
So what is your pace?
So I'm a big fan of series.
Do you do, you know, like how many books do you write per year on average?
It used to be two a year. At the moment, the police procedural took me 10 months to write. I thought, it's a contemporary. I won't have to look any facts up. But I had to look up how the police work. I actually attended a course by a guy called Graham Barclay, who was an ex-detective chief inspector. And he runs a course for authors now, teaching them everything they need to know about how the police work.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I learned it from watching the BBC and all the police procedurals there.
Yeah, which is all wrong.
Oh, really?
He said it's all wrong. The only truly correct definition of correct procedure. Have you ever seen a TV series called Happy Valley?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. He says that gets everything right. Absolutely everything right. All the other ones are they make things wrong. He said a detective inspector would never attend an interview, and yet they always do.
Right.
Because it's constables and sergeants that do the interviewing because they're better at it.
Oh, I see. Well, for dramatic purposes, you have to have the main character do the interrogation.
Yeah. That you do that. The higher grades are managers basically, and they tell other people what to do, but they don't investigate. But then everybody does it. You know, it's just Ian Rankins Rebus is a detective inspector, and he is very hands-on.
Interesting.
But it was a good course, great course. Yeah.
So you also offer, you know, I think you mentioned you helped a friend self-publish, and you offer tips to other authors. What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned as an indie author that you think new writers should know?
Learn how to write. The biggest lesson I've learned that nobody takes any notice of is I said I had 4 books out when I was in my 20s, and they sold a bit, and I could have probably carried on. But I got the rights to them back, and I was going to republish them. But when I got the books back, I looked at them and I thought, this is terrible. I read them and I thought, the writing's actually good. I like the writing, but there was absolutely no storyline. Mm-hmm. It's just total stream of consciousness from start to finish. It starts, there's stuff that happens, and it ends, but there's no overall arc. So I thought, I need to find out what books are made or how they're made. And so I bought loads and loads of books on craft. And I'm now an inveterate plotter, not a pantser. And my advice is most indie authors, wannabe indie authors that talk to me are pantsers. And I try to steer them in the right direction and say, you can do it that way, but it's going to take you much, much longer. The guy I was telling you about who'd done this one science fiction novel, I said, how long have you been working on it? 7 years, he said. So I finally finished it. And that's why I will do a detailed plot before I start. Not as much as I used to do. I used to do like 50K outlines. I pulled back from that a bit. Mm-hmm. But I know that, and that means I can do 2 books a year. I'm thinking at the moment, because I'm starting to employ somebody to do a lot of the admin around self-publishing, that I might be able to do 3 books next year. And I'll go back and I'll do one of the paranormal series, one of the police series, and maybe 1 or 2 Thomas Barrington books. Because I'm also starting to try to make them a bit shorter. Because they tend to be about 120,000 words.
Oh, really? That's long.
Yeah, it is. And the current requirement by trad publishers is 80 to 85,000. They will not accept anything over 85.
Right.
I know that because I've had several contact me over the last 18 months and say, we really like your work. We'd like to publish you. And I said, oh, what's involved? And we have a little to and fro conversation. And in the end, I always say no, because they're going to offer me less in royalty. And they said, oh, you want 2 or 3 books a year out of you at 80K each. And I said, I can't write that short and I don't want to write that fast.
Yeah.
And there's other things I want to do than just churn books out for you. Right. So, yeah.
So you're a full plotter and there's no surprise when you sit down and write. You've already got it all planned out.
It's always a surprise. It's like, I always think of it. I've got a skeleton and I am putting the flesh onto the skeleton. And it's like a body. The skeleton, everybody's got a similar sort of skeleton inside, but everybody has a different body, and it's the body that's interesting and the body that you relate to.
Right.
And okay, the plot is the bones of the book. The story is the flesh that coats that skeleton.
So there's still some surprises along the way as you
loads and loads.
That's what I found.
Mostly in characters.
Fun.
Yeah.
Now you've been a member of ALLi since the early days. So how has the indie author landscape changed since you first joined, and how do you see it evolving?
I think it's changed a lot. Who was it? Hugh Howey said self-publishing is a tsunami of shit, didn't he? And I think he was probably being kind. It's moved away from that. It's become more professional, but there are still a lot of people. I was reading now that there are people doing AI books and they're publishing 3 a day on Amazon because Amazon allowed you to publish 3 books a day. Mm. We're getting back into that Wild West mentality where it doesn't really count. The quality doesn't count. But I think a lot of the indie authors have become far more professional and they've learned their trade. And I think we're going through a sea change to some extent, because I know a lot of trad authors, and a lot of trad authors, because I appear to be the acceptable face of indie authors, because I'm not strident and I don't push it, but I just tick over and do what I do. And they come up and they say, I'm just about to be dropped by my agent and publisher. What's this self-publishing all about? What do I have to do? And they said, my agent told me I only get 10% royalty if I self-publish through Amazon. And I said, well, they would tell you that. You will get 70%. And they say, oh, really?
Yeah.
So I think over the next few years, particularly in the next 10 years, I think a lot of trad authors because publishers want big names.
Yeah.
It was always the same. They love big names. They love Stephen King. They love Lee Child. But that's got even worse now.
Yeah.
A lot of publishers, this is what I hear, are employing ghostwriters so that stars can publish a book. Some of them I know write their own books, but some of them are simply ghostwritten.
Yeah.
And so the conferences I go to has become the same. It used to be authors that were on the panels at these conferences. And now it is big name stars of TV, movies, and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. So what about the rest of us who want to make a living?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a difficult world for the second and third tier authors who used to be able to make a living of sorts from writing. And that's not the case anymore.
Yeah. So you think the stigma will go away, or if it hasn't already gone away?
I think it is. I think people like me and people like L.J. Ross, J.D. Kirk, lots of others are doing extremely well, and they have showed that as a self-publisher, although they've now gone with Amazon, as a self-publisher, you can sell lots and lots of books. You could be a very popular author. You can write reasonably good books, and that's all you have to do. And you can make a good living out of that. I make a fairly nice living for myself, but I'm convinced that a lot of trad authors can make as good a living or better than they have, and they don't have to chase around looking for new publishing deals and new something else. Most of them, I have a good friend I saw 2 weeks ago at her book launch. She's on her 5th book and her contract runs out after the 6th book. And she said, they're not even talking to me about renewing it now. And she's a really, really good author. Mm-hmm. Her books are very popular, and she may not be able to write anymore. But when I've got another good friend whose series, his publisher stopped publishing, didn't want his series, even though it's got 5 books in it. And he wrote a 6 and a 7. And he said to me, and I taught him how to self-publish it, because he's already got a name. These people have a name. They have a readership. The people don't care whether it's published by Hachette or whoever.
Mm-hmm.
They just follow the author. Nobody follows a publisher.
Right.
They follow an author.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of these trad authors could do very well indeed if they just...
Yeah. I think maybe some of the stigma is self-created. They maybe authors feel like they haven't really made it unless a traditional publisher gives them, like you say, validation.
Yeah.
But readers don't care.
And I must admit, when the trad publishers came to me and offered me a deal over the last few years, I was flattered. And I thought that would be quite nice. And then I looked at what they were offering and it simply wasn't worth it. It was a 3-book deal, no guarantee it would continue. I'd have to do 3 books a year. So it was a 12-month deal, 3 books a year, no advance, 50% royalty, which is quite good, but it's still not as good as I'm doing now.
Right.
And they still wouldn't do any marketing.
Right. They don't do marketing. You have to bring your own audience. Yeah.
You have to bring it. Yeah.
So
which is why they wanted the books, because they see I have an audience.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The reason that you're a successful self-publisher, that's what they're looking for. But why, what's your incentive?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So what's next for you? What are you focusing on now, and what can we see in the future?
I'm trying to swivel a bit so that I can make time for writing other than my main series. I've still got, I can still do a Thomas Barrington book every year, and I might start doing just one a year. And that means I will have the rest of the year for doing other projects. I would really love to go back to my fantasy book, because that was always going to be a 3-book series, a mini series. And it's plotted out in my head and on paper, it's plotted out. And I really love that book. And people I've given it to read have said, oh, this is one of your best books, this is. So I might go back to that. And I'll do the paranormal book, and I'll do the police procedurals. And I'm going to carry on with Thomas Barrington. He's about 62 now. And everybody says, oh, in medieval times, that was really old. He should be dead. I actually checked. And it turns out that if you get to the age of 15 in medieval times, you could quite easily live to 80 or 90.
Right.
Because all the childhood illnesses got you.
Yes.
And then if you got through the battles or the fights in the Middle Ages, you could live, as old as we do now. But my character's getting on, and he's got 2 children who I'm thinking of doing a spin-off series with. His daughter and his son, who are 2 totally different kinds of characters. And I've got some ideas about that, and I quite like that it might spin off, but I would still have to do Thomas until people realize that was part of the series and picked up on it.
Well, you are the poster child for indie publishing. You're doing everything right.
Yeah.
You're putting it out in bulk. You're coming up with interesting stories. You have a fan base, and you're making a living. So what more can you ask for?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Not much, yeah.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and telling us how it's all done.
Thank you, Howard. It was a pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you, David. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
You've been listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. I'm Howard Lovey, Content and Communications Manager at the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com. This podcast stream is proudly sponsored by Book Vault. Sell high-quality print-on-demand books directly to readers worldwide and earn maximum royalties selling directly. Automate fulfillment and create stunning special editions with Book Vault Bespoke. Visit bookvault.app today for an instant quote. If you are a member of ALLi and would like to be considered for the show, please write to me at howard@allianceindependentauthors.org and tell me what inspires you and how you can inspire other authors. As always, find more author advice, tips, and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.